Hello, insiders, and welcome to the Inside Job Podcast with Philip Cox. CHO-shekh, that is the name of this episode. Episode 14. Can you believe it? Episode 14, we're in the Earth and Sky series again, and this one is called CHO-shekh. Now, CHO-shekh is the Hebrew word for darkness. Now, it's easy to think about darkness and think about kind of having this negative sense to it when you talk about things that are dark. And so it's very normal and very obvious that we would associate darkness with something that's negative. But what if, just perhaps, is it possible that darkness in our life, difficulty, suffering, the more painful, uncomfortable, those kind of, is it possible that those aspects of life don't have to be seen as only negative? We're not saying that they're positive, but is it possible that they might actually be really important to our spiritual growth, to our mental growth and our mental health, the way we engage? Is it possible that the way we engage with darkness really matters? And is it possible that darkness might actually be here for a reason, and that it's not the enemy that we so often want it to be? That is what this podcast episode is about. So we're talking about CHO-shekh, my most recent post in my Substack. If you want to subscribe or get notified when new posts come out and you want to read, we do these on the podcast, so if you like to be read too, this is a perfect place. But if you want to read, there's always extra footnotes and always those kind of things. You can go to Philip Cox, that's Philip with one L, philipcox.substack.com. And that will take you to the post, and you can subscribe there. You can do all sorts of good stuff there. So let's jump into this episode on darkness. Darkness. CHO-shekh in the Earth and Sky series. I start by telling a silly story about baseball. And I say baseball. I love baseball. It is a truly great game. It's also an odd game. For instance, a strike isn't when you hit the ball, it's when you swing and miss. A steal isn't taking a base with you, but it's leaving one behind. Hits are either fair or foul, not fair or unfair. It's also a game of stats. This is the only game where you'll ever hear an announcer say something like, well, the fans will be happy to see Willie Turnbuckle coming to the plate as he's hitting over 400 during games that are played in July that are also played in the afternoon when played on the West Coast. And strangely enough, he'll be right. It is a game full of crazy statistics. Baseball is a game that once it's inside you, it's inside you. And even though I live in Australia now and it's not as big here, obviously, as it is in the States, it's a game that's deeply, deeply inside of me and my life and my family's life. So deep, in fact, that 2 years ago, I started playing in this over 35-year-old adult baseball league. This isn't softball. This isn't baseball with tennis balls. This is hard pitch, fast pitch baseball with over 35s. And so they call this league Division I Masters. I mean, think about that title, Division I Masters. Oh my goodness, how serious could this be? But I came to find out that they do this solely for the players. One final stroke of the ego before hammies tear, backs explode, and we're all put out to pasture one final time. The name Division I Masters, it actually almost kept me from signing up. I thought there's no way I'm going to be able to step back into this game. I haven't played since I was 15. I'm not going to be able to step back into baseball at a Division I Masters level, of course. But I pulled up on our first day of training and discovered that as I walked around the dugout, where the guys were starting to stretch, 2/3 of our starting lineup were actually having all of their pre-training beers, and the other third were taking their final drag of a cigarette. So I realized pretty soon that I was gonna be just fine. Only I wasn't fine, not at all. Well, I was fine playing the game. It turns out that your muscle memory actually kind of sticks around for a while, but I wasn't fine because it turns out that my body hates me. How do I know my body hates me? Well, I know because it breaks down every single chance it gets. The sad fact keeps me plunging into the at-home ice bath that Sue's got me a couple Father's Days ago. And you might say, I know. Ice plunges, they're everywhere these days. Everybody's posting, getting into an ice bath and all. And listen, I'm not one to jump on bandwagons. And anybody who knows me as an Enneagram 4 and anybody who knows me even outside of that knows that I am whatever the opposite of a bandwagon jumper is. What would the opposite of a bandwagon jumper be? A solo anchor sitter? A one stump digger? A single stock still slumberer? Well, moving on. I could have done that for hours, by the way, coming up with the opposite of a bandwagon jumper. My first ice bath was around 3 years ago when my friend Tim invited me to come down to the Gold Coast for one of his daily plunges. And I've actually got, there's a video telling about that experience on YouTube somewhere. You can look that up. But that experience was crazy. That experience was wild. And though I've gotten way more used to the process of slowly sinking into that frigid water, my immediate autopilot response is still the same, which sounds something like, everything in me wants to shoot up out of the water and Wile E. Coyote run across the water, diving safely under a heated blanket. But as I've learned to stay in the water, practice my deep breathing, I find that the benefits actually outweigh the pain. I always leave the water. I leave it feeling more energized. I feel more clear. My brain feels clearer, less foggy. My muscles the next day aren't anywhere as nearly as sore as they would be on the days, as they are on the days that I don't get in the ice bath. And so it's well worth it. Now, what you might also know about me already is that these freezing sits, they're doing so much more than just healing my sore body so that I can head back on the field the next week. I'm starting to ritualize this practice. Ritual, we're back to ritual. Here we go again. Ritualize. Why are we doing that? It's bringing me face to face with presence, with this presence. You can't be thinking about something else when you get in that water. When you hit that freezing cold water, all of your attention, all of your focus, all of your everything goes immediately right into your body. And it invites me into something deeper as I ritualize this practice. And I begin to learn to find calm right here in what feels like insanity and craziness and pain and everything that wants me to escape this moment. As I ritualize it and as I begin to see what it's doing inside of me, this deeper thing, I begin to find calm right there in what feels like insanity. So as I go one click deeper, I can see just how quickly my tendency is to divert away from other areas of pain. So yeah, in the ice bath, I wanted to divert from pain, but there's so many other areas where I go, wow, every time something painful, every time something discomforting, uncomfortable comes into my life, disrupting, my tendency is to just see how quickly can I Wile E. Coyote run out of those situations and replace them with something that attempts to distract or to soothe my restless soul. Even as an Enneagram 4, which is, that's, if you don't know, that's somebody who's actually quite comfortable with some of the darker, some of the more painful, some of the more melancholic parts of life. Even for me, it's still amazing to begin to see how much of a propensity I have to avoid those kind of feelings and those kind of emotions. So this ice bath, when ritualized, reminds me that pain, even really intense pain, can be seen from another lens, a deeper lens, something that's reframed so we can begin to see it for its usefulness. Any perspective you have, anything you're looking at, if you come to it with the right perspective, it can be helpful. If you come to it with the wrong perspective, it can be unhelpful. And that can be the way that you're engaging sacred scripture, the way that you're engaging a conversation, the way that you're engaging a relationship. anytime you come to something, if you don't come with, you can come with a helpful lens or you can come with an unhelpful lens. It matters the framework we have and that we carry through life. If you can come with the right perspective, everything can be helpful. It can become a teacher. It can help you be curious and engaged with more than just this enemy that we're meant to fight, this difficulty, this stubborn, this frustrating thing that we feel like our autopilot wants to just fight against. Presence, ritualization, coming to a new perspective, reframing, it can help these things be a teacher and help us to become curious about these things and engage with them more so that we don't see them as an enemy, but we begin to see them as a friend and as a teacher. Now, you probably wouldn't find me saying how good the experience is right there in the middle of it. And it's not like I look forward to that moment of crossing the threshold between the air and the freezing water. It's still terrifying and it's still a horrible sensation. So I'm not saying it's good, but through practice, I've begun to realize its purpose and what it's doing inside of me. And that is something that I would call good. So I'm not calling the experience good, but I'm calling the result and what it's doing inside of me. I would call that good. Now, as you probably noticed in the weirdness of this title, obviously in CHO-shekh, we are obviously talking about an ancient Hebrew word, which means we're in the Earth and Sky series again, which means we're talking creation stories and ancient Hebrew, etc., etc. And if you're already clued onto that, then you are right and you've done well, and you get 15 insider points given to you. You put those in your pocket. If you know where we're headed with this, then you get some 15 insider points. You can redeem those nowhere. But the work I want to explore today, and the role it plays in Genesis 1, because we're in these ancient creation stories, so we're talking Genesis 1 here. The work I want to explore today and the word I want to explore today and its role in Genesis 1 ties into this icy experience that we've been talking about already. Our word CHO-shekh, it's the Hebrew word for darkness. Darkness shows up very early in the Genesis 1 creation story. First couple of sentences, it's entwined with that wild and watery wasteland of tohu vavohu, which we've talked at length about other places, and we keep referring back to. It's that chaotic, watery, deserty wasteland that is unproductive, and this darkness is right there, mixed in with all that. The Spirit hovers over this deep, dark, chaotic water. But I think what's happening with this darkness word is worth its own post, and that's why we're here today. So darkness is a major player in the mythology and the lore of just about every ancient culture that's out there, particularly in their stories and their lore about creation and the creation of the cosmos, the creation of the stars and the land and all that stuff in ancient cosmological ways. But it is a key player, darkness is. And so we can find these stories as widespread as the ancient Near Eastern cultures of like Egypt and Ugarit and Babylon, the Mesopotamian, the Sumerian stories. Also, a lot of indigenous cultures such as a lot of Aboriginal stories, the Gumaroi and the indigenous American, the Cherokee creation stories. They are darkness is ingrained in their creation of the world stories. This is not just a biblical notion. It is widespread throughout the ancient world. It's no surprise then that we would find it also here at work in these early pages of the Bible. However, strange things are afoot here in Genesis 1. And if you caught the little reference to Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure in that, then welcome home, my friend. You are in the right place. Strange things are afoot here at the Genesis 1. Rather than destroying, because something's always happening in Genesis 1 that's similar to the world around it, but it's always doing something a little bit different. So rather, what's it doing different here? Rather than destroying or imprisoning the darkness, which is what we would expect to find in many other ancient myths, this God in Genesis 1 is allowing the darkness to exist. Usually, the God goes to war against darkness. The sun god goes to defeat and destroy and bury the darkness. But in this poem, this poetic narrative of Genesis 1, this God allows darkness to exist. Now, the question here that's worth asking is why? Why, God? Why would you do this? And, I don't know what tradition that you grew up in, but you would be right in asking this question of why. And in all honesty, there's a good reason. When you think deeply about this God who would allow darkness, you're allowing darkness to exist. There's a good reason to be offended, to be put off by this strange detail, this oddity in this story. And regardless of what tradition you come from, in my opinion, any religious tradition that doesn't make plenty of room for shaking your fists at the heavens in frustration, in confusion, and protest is not a tradition that's sturdy enough to withstand the reality of human life. Because reality is, there is darkness. Reality is, there is pain. There is suffering. You can't just pray it away. You can't just turn a blind eye to it. You can't just spin everything so that life is up and to the right and positive all the time. That doesn't reflect reality. And unfortunately, there are Christian traditions and religious traditions out there that try to spin out a theology that says that if there's suffering, if there's darkness, if there's difficulty, it's because God isn't there, or because he has left it to its own devices, and that if you could just get yourself more in alignment with this divine being, then all the darkness and suffering of life would disappear. And I've been a part of traditions that leaned in that direction, and it gets very, very complicated when life does present death, suicide, cancer, divorce, bankruptcy, businesses failing. When those things begin to happen, the wheels begin to come off of that prosperity gospel type, word of faith type of theologies and ways of viewing reality, because they aren't broad enough. They don't have the breadth and the depth to actually hold real life experience. So any tradition that doesn't make plenty of room for suffering, doesn't make plenty of room for lament, is not a tradition sturdy enough to withstand the reality of human life. Okay, that's all I'll say about that. It's very understandable. Now, this is important to say. It is understandable to want a powerful and divine figure to rid the world of darkness. Obviously, nobody likes it. The ice bath, I don't call it good. It's not fun. Of course, it'd be better without it. You would think, in our way of thinking, of course it's better to stay comfortable. And if this God is seemingly so powerful enough to separate this chaotic abyss with nothing more than an exhale, an outward breath, to breathe over this chaotic water and separate it. And we see other times, and even in the Exodus story, there's this breath that comes over that separates those chaotic waters, those waters that are keeping Israel from moving forward into the promised land. And a simple exhale gets rid of those chaotic waters. So why would this powerful God, why would he not blow the darkness right out of that water? Well, I remember reading a while back the brilliant and very formative Franciscan father, Richard Rohr. He's been very formative in my thinking. I remember him in a book calling God. He said that God was the great allower. I think that was in The Immortal Diamond. He says that. He calls God the great allower. Now, I struggled with that phrase for a while before realizing that that's really accurate. Despite, as humans, our many feeble attempts to control, our egoic control, to try to keep God from allowing things. We struggle with this idea of a God who allows darkness and suffering. And yet, what brought me home on this one is, well, I don't want to think that God would allow these things to happen, and yet they wouldn't exist if God hadn't allowed them. Now, it's worth saying that allowing is not the same thing as generating. I'm not saying that God has generated suffering. We do a pretty good job on the human space of generating lots of suffering, systemic suffering, individual, relational suffering, our own personal suffering. We do a good job of generating suffering. But it seems that God allows it to happen. So it's worth saying that he's not allowing it. He's allowing it, that he's not generating it. And that's something to reflect deeply on, because there are also some really not helpful traditions out there that would have God generating the suffering. And I don't think that that's what is happening, but he is allowing it. This great allowing that Rohr talks about of God felt really disrupting and really counterintuitive to my soul. And if you're anything like old Ice Bath Phil, the most natural move is to arrange our life so that everything is positive and moving ever upward and to the right, like a good stock chart. You want it going up and to the right. You don't want it coming down. You don't want it costing you things. So we try to arrange our life so that everything is up. But the problem is you can't arrange things. So try arranging a room where everything is just up. You can't arrange things up unless things are down. You can't even understand up and positive, and you can't understand those things without the opposite also being there, holding it in tension. So we want to arrange our life like that, where things are more comfortable, less painful, more successful, less of what we often name as failure. We see it as failure. It doesn't mean it is failure, but we often name things that are failure that actually become the seedbed for our greatest growth and greatest seasons of transformation. Oftentimes had the moment of beginning in suffering and what we would call failure. Again, this is completely understandable that we'd want to arrange our life this way. Who wouldn't want the darker spaces of life to get exorcised or extracted and eliminated? And I've even noticed that there's this trend that's going out there where people are offering courses in these ancient spiritual practices, things like prayer and meditation, and they're talking about them as a way to eliminate anxiety. Oh, meditation will eliminate your anxiety. It'll eliminate your stress. And I think what they're aiming for there is good. And I think I know what they mean when they say that. But I just want to say that I think it's also important, and we need to be aware that if we're not careful, even our spiritual practices, even our understanding of God, our faith systems, and the way we think about the world, and our practices and traditions can become yet another way of bypassing the difficult and the painful parts of life by promising that there's a way of escape from them, as though God is some kind of cosmic. I like to say that people treat God like a cosmic get out of life free card. You know, in Monopoly, the old get out of jail card that gets you out, without having to pay or without having to, spend 3 times rolling the dice. We treat God like he's if we get the right chance card, then he's a get out of life free card, a get out of suffering free card. But it just doesn't seem that reality and the divine being that's holding reality, it doesn't seem that reality works that way. It doesn't seem that God works that way. And culturally, it seems that we struggle to hold that tension. We struggle to engage doubt and discomfort and those things in a healthy way. Oftentimes we do one of two things. We either try and avoid it at all costs, like we've been talking about, distracting ourselves, numbing the pain, pretending that it isn't there, just sweeping it under the rug. The other side of that is We allow those narratives to take over. We let anxiety and we let grief, we let suffering overwhelm us and drown us, and it ends up shaping our entire narratives. And we see that these two extremes, we see them exemplified in our consumption of media. Social media algorithms, they are finely tuned to give us exactly what we want, either an endless stream of curated content reinforcing our preferences and distracting us from discomfort, or on the other extreme, they thrive on outrage. Algorithms are built on comfort and outrage, binge and anger. It's one of the two. And these things that thrive on outrage, which push the most polarizing and inflammatory content right to the top of your feed, and the way it does that and the things that it puts right in front of you leaves little room for nuance, for reasonable disagreement, or even challenge in a respectful and gentle way. Rarely are we given or taught how to wrestle with the complexity. We're not given the space to do that. We're not taught how to wrestle with complexity, to sit with an idea that unsettles us without being forced to either fully embrace it or reject it and the person that's bringing that opinion, to reject them outright. But in Genesis 1, in this ancient wisdom tradition, we see God holding this tension. He doesn't eliminate the darkness, but he also doesn't call it good. He names it, he sets boundaries for it, and he places it within a larger story. Darkness simply is. That's just reality. There is darkness. It is part of the created order. It's existing before the introduction of light, and it's holding space for potential to emerge. And some theological traditions can frame darkness as inherently evil, but Genesis here is suggesting something that's way more complex and way more nuanced. In my belief, I firmly offer this to you, that darkness is not the opposite of God's presence. It seems that God often moves most profoundly in hiddenness, in the spaces that we least expect, stirring and moving over the dark waters of our life and drawing from them something that is ultimately beautiful and ultimately good. You know, this is where I find that the work of spiritual direction can be so useful. Often sitting with others in direction means that we're exploring the difficult areas of life and faith and doubt and struggle. And we don't engage them as problems that need to be solved or problems that we need to find a way to bypass. But we explore them as invitations to be encountered, to be wrestled with, to be listened to. When we stop resisting suffering as something to escape or explain away, we start to notice how it shapes us. We see that the very things we once viewed as obstacles might actually be openings instead. In my own journey, in the lives of those I sit with, I have seen this again and again. Our struggles, if we let them, have a way of leading us home. Our journey into a deeper experience of spirit often involves making room for and seeing our brokenness and our limitations not as something to be ashamed of, not as something to be hidden away, but as the very place where transformation begins. I've been learning something that's been so important and very fascinating sitting in these ice baths after baseball games. I've begun to realize that rather than my first instinct, which we've been talking about, of resisting the pain, there's a shift I've been doing, and it's a shift that we can all do, and it doesn't take much, but it just takes a little bit of awareness to go, instead of resisting this, because that's what your body's doing. When your body clenches up, that's your body resisting. Instead of that, I can become curious about the pain. Very focused, very specifically, but this mental shift almost instantly transforms the experience almost instantly, almost every time. I start to lean into the pain, and instead of resisting it, I begin to look at it with a lens of curiosity and even like a little bit of awe and wonder. Like, oh my goodness, man, what my foot is just clenching up and I just put all my attention on exactly where it's cramping and going, wow, my foot's really cramping right now. Isn't that interesting? I wonder why that's happening. I wonder what, and I put all my attention and focus into that cramp, and suddenly the water's a little bit less cold. The foot is a little bit less, and something shifts inside of me. So what if, like in this ancient poem, we can begin to learn to make room for, become curious about, begin to investigate, even with a sense of wonder, what these dark places in our lives, the pains, the anxieties, the difficulties, the areas of discomfort, what if we begin to make room for them? Begin to ask, why have you come? What are you here to teach me? What is this about? Our pain, it comes from somewhere, and we can either fight against it like it's an enemy, or we can go, what if you, we've talked about this in the welcoming post, we can welcome it as a friend, not because we want it to be the driver of our car or be with us for the rest of our life, but we just simply don't treat it as something that needs to be fought against. We just go, oh, there you are. I see you. I see you, temptation. I see you, addiction. I see you, anxiety. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Thank you for reminding me that there's something I need to pay attention to. It's painful and it's difficult, and I'm not going to carry you through my whole life, but have you come to teach me something? Have you come to remind me that there's something that needs to be paid attention to? If it's something in our body, rather than shutting it down and not going to see a doctor. I literally just prayed with a lady this last week, and she had all these pains and things in her body, and I just said, have you gone to see a doctor? And she hadn't, and she was resistant to that. And it's like, no, this is your body reminding you that something needs to be done. And yes, we'll pray, yes, with all that stuff. But this is your body saying something's out of order and you need to go and get it taken care of. We need to see the discomforts and the pains as a reminder that there's something here in my current situation that's out of order, and it needs attention. And we need to become curious about these things. Our anxieties have come from somewhere, and we need to give them the honor and dignity that they deserve. Because what if they've got a function? What if they've got a meaning and a purpose for existing? What if we try to learn from them? What if we begin interrogating these spaces of darkness to see why they've come and what they're inviting us to see? And to reiterate, I'll say it again, I'm not saying that darkness is good. I'm not saying that discomfort, I'm not saying that suffering is good in and of itself, or that suffering and that obsessing over suffering is it's not something that we should seek out, and obsessing over suffering is not any wiser than ignoring it. We can always take these ideas too far. And it's like our human tendency is to grab something and take it to the extreme, or go worst case scenario, or go, well, yeah, but that's a slippery slope. I hate the slippery slope argument. You can do that with anything. Of course, anything can be used the wrong way. Of course it can. Obviously, we see it all the time. But that's not what we're talking about. That is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is learning to be present with the dark matter in our lives, allowing it, giving it room, not with fear and not with surrender, as in, I just surrender to the suffering, come more suffering, I want more suffering. Not with fear and not with hands up, victimization, but with curiosity. Because here's the thing, if we can do that, if we can stay present even when it's uncomfortable, we might find that darkness holds more than we thought. Not as an enemy to be fought or something to be consumed by, but as a space where something real is being formed inside of us. Genesis tells us that before the light was spoken into existence, before order was drawn from the deep, God's Spirit was already there, hovering over the chaotic landscape, stirring in the darkness, moving over the waters. Maybe the invitation isn't to escape the dark, but to trust that God is already here, right in the middle of it, and present to it and to us. Like the ice bath, maybe our first instinct will always be to resist. I know mine still is. To flail, to shout, to pull off a Looney Tunes jump and run. But if we learn to catch ourselves before we do it, and we learn to breathe through it, what if in the place we least expect, we end up finding God? Not waiting on the other side of our suffering, but present within it, shaping us even here and even now. What if darkness isn't just something to endure, but something that transforms? Well, that's it for this post, this Substack post, CHO-shekh, episode 14, did we say? 14? I hope that's right. 14. Thanks so much for joining in. As always, you can go to the Substack, read old posts there, find old podcasts there, all that stuff. I invite you to subscribe because I love knowing who's engaging with these things. If this is helpful, share it. I'd love for it to keep growing. And if you enjoyed it, then send it around to your friends. But until next time, peace and joy.